Hey there, everybody, and welcome to Revolutionary Health. Thank you. Yes. Thank you so much for joining us, and welcome back to all of you who join us for the show. So, my name is Johnny Cornegay, and I am with the Counter Narrative Project. The Counter Narrative Project mission is to build power among Black gay men and to work in coalition and solidarity with all movements committed to racial and social justice. You can find us online. You can find us online at Twitter. We are at Building Desire. And at Instagram, we are at The Counter Narrative. And you can find us on Facebook at The Counter Narrative Project. You are joining us here on YouTube. Thank you so much. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and go ahead and hit the thumbs up button while you're there to let us know that you like this video, and go ahead and share it with your friends. Make sure that you go to the Counter Narrative Project's website and join the mailing list. We're at thecounternarrative.org. So I have the pleasure of being Director of Mobilization for the Counter Narrative Project, and I have these amazing folks with me. I am joined with
David Malbranch, and I was a bad man today. Bad in a good way.
Yes, bad.
I'm not going to get into detail, but I was bad in a good way today.
We'll talk about
Later.
And I'm Jon Gabriel Ortiz. I am with Thrive SS.
Welcome,
Yay,
John.
Thrive SS!
Thrive SS in the
Hey,
spot.
Dwayne,
What's
Larry, and Daniel.
Hey. What's happening? Thank you so much for joining us, John. So we have a really important topic. We're going to get into the topic in a moment, but a couple of things you need to know. There is a little chat window. If you're joining us through your phone, it's there. If you're joining us on your computer, it's there. Go ahead. We want to hear from you. So go ahead, send us your hellos, send us your comments, send us your questions, and we will do our best to get through as many comments and questions as we can throughout this broadcast. So today we're going to be, I've never seen this topic talked about, so I'm glad we're doing this.
Right.
We're going to be talking about sexual compulsive behavior. I'm going to define that for us in a minute. You know what? I'll define it for us right now since I have it here. So you may be asking. So I got this from the MayoClinic.org.
It's a reputable source.
Very reputable source. Didn't want to go to just Wikipedia, right? So according to the Mayo Clinic, compulsive sexual behavior is sometimes called hypersexuality disorder or sexual addiction. And it's defined as an excessive preoccupation with sexual fantasies, urges, or behaviors that is difficult to control, causes you distress, or negatively affects your health, job, relationships, or other parts of life. That's the way they define it. And so we're going to be having some conversation about this today. And I want to shout out folks. So we already have Alex. What's happening, Alex? Hi to you. And our friend Caleb is joining us.
Hey,
Caleb, what's happening, Caleb? Thanks for being here with us. So we are going to talk about the topic, but before we talk about the topic, we got a question that came in from an older video. So I'm going to bring that up first. So we got a question that came in. This is from show number 28 on Black Gay Men and Monogamy. We'll go ahead and put the link in the comments for you. But this question came in from Be Happy, Be Grateful. And it is, what are the psychological and physical health risks for non-monogamous relationships? Why are we even discussing this when the rates of STIs among Blacks are skyrocketing? I'm not judging what folks do. I'm simply concerned that we may be promoting something, non-monogamy, that may lead to even more horrific unhappiness due to all of the risks. So I wanted to start here. So my thought on that is the reality is monogamy and non-monogamy is part of people's lives, you know. And one of the things that we do on Revolutionary Health is have all of these discussions that it's not about there's no right or wrong for us when we were talking about the particular topics. It's more about we're talking about topics that I know impact our community. So
it's interesting because that comment, whenever someone says I'm not judging, but then that's kind of what they are. And I think the comment is loaded, and maybe he didn't intend whoever it was to kind of like, just kind of code it with some judgment, but it can come off as that. So the reality is that yes, if you have multiple sexual partners, just by sheer numbers, especially in a city like Atlanta or a major metropolitan city where there may be a high prevalence of sexually transmitted infections, you're going to come across somebody, and your likelihood of contracting an STI is going to be higher. There's no doubt about that. I think it gets a little problematic when you start talking about, risks, horrific risks, and unhappiness, and all this other stuff, because someone can be tremendously happy and get an STI and still be happy. Someone can be in a monogamous relationship and still get an STI and be happy or unhappy. And then someone can be in a non-monogamous relationship and have any of the above conditions and still be happy or unhappy. So I think you have to be careful. And then I think at the end of the day, what I recommend to people is just do what works for you.
Yeah.
And my approach is, like, when I talk about sexual health, and we've probably covered this before in other shows, but I'm never the condom police. And I was just speaking to some campers who were 12 and 13 years old in Virginia on last Friday. And I basically told them, like, look, you have to do what you're comfortable doing. And I'm not the condom police. I will tell you it can protect you from X, Y, and Z, meaning HIV, gonorrhea, and chlamydia, but it won't protect you against syphilis, herpes, and HPV. So you could protect yourself with condoms, and someone who uses condoms can be Judge Judy and look at somebody that's not using condoms, but then the person who's using condoms can still get herpes or warts. And then where are they going to be? Because they'll say, well, this, that, the other. So I think you have to be careful, and you have to just center it around what works for you, what's going to be pleasurable for you, whether it's monogamy, non-monogamy, along this journey and continuum, and then figure out the best way to protect yourself and what you're comfortable with and what risks you're comfortable taking. Like, it's not up to somebody else to define that.
But for me, it's that automatically assumption, right? That because they're non-monogamous, that they're doing all of this other stuff.
Right.
And I don't think that that's fair to people. I have a son who's in a polyamorous relationship. That's not monogamy.
Right.
And they have a very happy and it works for them. That's what it works for them.
Right.
And to say that, you could be bringing home diseases, that's all amongst themselves. And here's the thing. If you do, then what? That's the conversation we have to have. If you go out and if you contract an STD, what do you do?
Right.
And one of the things that we do on the show, and we've had, actually, we should probably bring back some conversations about some STIs as well.
Sure.
Because I think that is important, and I really appreciated that question because it's one of those things that I'm sure other people were thinking as well.
Yeah.
And wanted to make sure that we brought that question in, and we're going to try and do that more often. So if you go back and you watch an older video and you have questions and comments, we will do our best to catch them and be able to respond to folks on our new shows.
If y'all could see Alvin.
So thank you so much for that comment, and thank you both so much actually for weighing in there.
No, I think it's good, and keep asking questions like that, even if it's with an old show. Send a comment and let us know, because that was a good comment, because people do think about that. Are you promoting non-monogamy, and are there risks associated with that? And I'm sitting there saying, yes, there may be, but let people do what they're comfortable and what makes them happy. And for you, it may not be a non-monogamous relationship, but for them, it may be. So it's kind of a hard check. And most folks are grown-ass adults, so they can decide what risks they're comfortable with or which they're not comfortable with.
Yeah. So. And I think actually this gets into tonight's topic, right? So I know that my first time becoming aware of this topic in public sphere is through pop culture. So it was coming up a lot in kind of the late 90s, early 2000s. And one of the things and I've actually talked to folks that we've had private discussions about this as well. So I wanted to just kind of have some dialogue, and I think some conversations that we don't really have. And so when thinking about sexual compulsive behavior, this is not defining people's sex and how they have sex or what type of sex or what people even enjoy to have.
Right.
This is really just having some dialogue about this particular behavior, because it is something that some people do seek assistance for.
Right.
So in the beginning, you mentioned the different ways that they call, and I think we've settled on sexual compulsivity, right, as something that's non-judgmental. Because when people hear addiction, which is they automatically fall into this this space of, you know, these people are doing these things and they can control themselves,
Right,
and they
right.
put themselves and other people in harm. So it's great to have those terms spelled out, but at the end of the day, we're all talking about sexual compulsivity.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is that when you look at the DSM five, sexual addiction is not in there.
Okay.
For a reason, and well, I think for several reasons.
DSM-5 is the Psychiatric Disorders
Thank you.
Manual. So, in case you don't know what DSM-5
Thank you.
means, and so what John's saying is that it's not officially
Recognized
defined as a psychiatric
yeah.
diagnosis, right?
Now, it does fall within the other category,
Right.
Right, and so, but addiction itself is not in there, in for several reasons. One of the reasons is that they can't. So the sexual, the addiction to sex is about a behavior, addicted to a behavior, not a substance.
Gotcha.
And so they found it difficult to diagnose it as an addiction because they really can't correlate the two.
So do they do that with like gambling addiction? I'm thinking about gambling because that's a behavior too.
Yeah, and I don't know if
they could put it on the same level, like as far as like receptors and
Yeah.
physiology. Okay, got it.
And then the other part about that is that, and this is why I did the He's Gotta Have a study, I'll talk about that in a second,
Right.
was because there's not enough information out there. There's not enough studies being done.
Right.
And especially when we're talking about gay men or LGBT people in general,
Right.
and then specifically to black and brown you know,
Oh,
LGBT
please.
people.
Yeah,
there wasn't when I did a He's Gotta Have a study, and I had spoken to Dr. Milbranch about it, and I said, I just don't see it anywhere.
Wow.
You know, and so you can't really put something on the books that nobody has really done
Nobody's
extensive
researched.
research.
Right.
And you know, we have talked a lot about the importance of research and funding research that really does study the things within our community that are important for our community. And this is one of those things that should be on that very long list.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting because one of the things that John was saying, like when you talk about compulsion, it means like something you just do. It's almost like an impulse. You don't necessarily have control of it, but it's almost like a reaction to something. And when I conceptualize sexual compulsivity, I think about like kind of the reaction to stress. And I'll just say for myself, like it's different from an addiction. So I remember explaining it to a group of guys at one of the old YBGLI conferences, and that I was going through a lot of stress. I was working, I was doing all this other stuff. And back then in those days was like Adam for Adam, Black Gay Chat, all those things online. So we didn't have the mobile apps. And what I would notice is that when I got stressed, either it was a breakup of a relationship or work was really bothering me or I felt overwhelmed, I would go right to that. And so I think it fits on the addiction continuum because you're using it to kind of cope. But we don't really think about it that way. But I remember when I gave the talk, several people came up to me afterwards and were like, oh my God, I noticed that pattern with myself that when I'm at work and I'm dealing with a lot of stuff and then I get my first moment out, I'm on my app trying to get some dick or trying to get some ass. And it's like, they were like, what is that about? And it's interesting because with alcoholism, they had to change it for medical providers because there used to be like these questionnaires and they would ask if you drank every day, how many drinks every day. And then what they realized that most people may not drink every day.
Correct.
And all alcoholics don't drink every day. So they go into binge drinking. So they say, when you do drink, like if you drink on the weekends, how many drinks do you have? And now there's a completely new set of criteria for that. And I think with sexual compulsivity, sex addiction, maybe there's probably something along those lines where we have to kind of redefine. But again, without the research, especially with black and brown folk, we don't know.
There is a SAT, which is a sexual addiction survey test or something like that.
Right.
SAST.
Right.
That's what I use as the foundation for the He's Gotta Have a study. And so just to give a quick background on the He's Gotta Have a study, it's something I did in 2006 while I was working at Fulton County Health Department. And what I was a pre and post test counselor. And what I was noticing is the same people were coming into the clinic reporting like huge numbers of sex. And let me put a disclaimer, I'm not saying that because they were having so much sex that they were automatically sexually addicted.
Right.
What I was questioning is that if is there a correlation between having so much sex and nobody saying to them, "Oh, you know what? I noticed that you have a lot of sexual partners. Let me ask you some additional questions."
Got it.
That was never
That was-
built into the
Right. The
pre
questionnaire.
to post counseling.
Yeah.
So I was looking at, okay, what does that look like? What does you know, is this even an issue in the Black and brown communities?
Mhm.
You know, and then if it is, how does that impact HIV prevention? You know, and that was the premise of it. And so when we were looking at the questions, when I started doing the research, when you were going, I say diagnose, but that's basically the language that was being used then, was if you want to get diagnosed, if you want to see if there was an issue, you took this addiction addiction survey, assessment survey, and then if you answered 5 or more, then they'll recommend some kind of therapy.
Oh wow.
You know,
Okay.
and so I was wondering, is this something that we can integrate into pre-process counseling?
Yeah.
And so then I did the study. I had 971 respondents in 6 months, and we did it in. We went to like clubs. We went to like on the online, and this was everywhere. This was not just Atlanta, and then we also had like a discussion series that came out of it. That he's got to have a discussion series. We did it at Second Sunday. We did it at Pride. We did it at several big venues, and everything was anonymous. And to see that more than half of the people were saying, you know, I never thought about it. You know, I've never gotten diagnosed. Nobody has even talked to me about it. You know, and so it was and then the behaviors that was listed in the assessment, a lot of people were recognizing that they were doing, you know, in excessive and not only the actions, not only the behaviors, but also the consequences after.
Sure.
Oh, and I want to bring that in. I want to. There was a question that came in from Adam. Thank you so much for that question, Adam. Is the He's Got to Have It study? Is that public? Is that something that you know if it's still online?
No, it's not online, and that was the problem because, like I told David, that when I tried to do it, it was really to see if I could change what was going on in Fulton County. That didn't happen, and then after that, I got sick, so that's why I couldn't continue doing the study.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
But it's something that I know that somebody has to pick up.
Okay.
They have to have, so there's no way to get those questions or the questionnaire.
I have some of the, I had the like some of the questions. I don't have like the forms.
Yeah.
You know, all the movements.
Are we giving John's like are you comfortable like giving out your Twitter handle or your IG handle that people could contact you with the questions? Because I do think that's a good point. So that's a great question, Adam, is because there's John's information there. But basically what we can do is, you know, you look at generation. If you did this study in 2006, that's 13 years ago.
Right.
So there's a new generation of kids coming up. You look at Generation Z coming in right now and who are teenagers and, you know, early 20s. There may be a very different dynamic going on right now. And especially like the intersections with kind of the meth epidemic that we're seeing among Black and brown kids and stuff like that.
And
I think it would be very
now,
interesting.
because at that point, like that wasn't like the access to
the apps weren't around back then.
Correct. Right.
But one of the questions that we did was because back then what was big is the pre-planning of sex. You know, of people that were going to travel, get on Adam,
and now you don't.
And now it's just like I get there, and
wait, there's a dick around the corner. Oh, there's an ass, you know, down the street, so I can just go.
Supposed to meet me after work.
Right, I'm just, you know, it just happens like that, so it happens quickly. So I think it would be really interesting to see kind of what dynamics would change. That's fascinating.
I agree, and if there are folks out there, Adam, thank you so much for that. And if there are folks out there that have studies that you're aware of or have experiences, you know, with different organizations, resources that you can share, please. Pop those into the chat window because we will share it. And one of the things I wanted to bring into this, because I gave the definition, I wanted to dive deeper into what the Mayo Clinic says about what are examples of this, right? So compulsive sexual behavior may involve a variety of commonly enjoyable sexual experiences. So masturbation, cybersex, multiple sexual partners, use of pornography, or paying for sex. When these sexual behaviors become a major focus of life, are difficult to control, and are disruptive or harmful to you or others, they may be considered a compulsive sexual behavior. I want to So it was funny when I was researching for this show. One of the things that I've talked about a lot, especially now with phones, is the access to porn. And I'm sure that there are some studies out there which talk about this, but I know that folks access porn a lot more, and it's easily accessible and it's everywhere, right?
So, yeah.
And how we've talked about this and how that impacts our sexual behavior, our ability to perform, or even our desire to perform with other people.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've noticed, and I think it comes into play with like today's thing, but I remember when I first heard, and I remember hearing Jon talk about it back, like Jon was talking about it a long time ago, and nobody was fucking listening to you. It was just crazy. But I remember when I was going to therapy, and I had just tested positive. This was 2007. And then after that, I had an encounter in my professional setting with somebody. And I was explaining it to my psychologist and saying, like, what's going on with this? And then he said, well, have you ever thought about sexual addiction or sexual compulsion? And I remember saying, those are those guys that, you know, they're jacking off, they're masturbating so much that they forget to go to their jobs, they do this, that, and the other. I said, so they're doing it so much that it threatens and he interrupted me and said, their health? And I said, yeah. And then he said, their job? And I said, okay. Because I was on that train of saying, like, that's not me, that's not what I do, that's not how I do it. And he shut me down, and it kind of, the analogy that I put it as, and I bring it back to alcohol here, for the analogy, because it's the difference between like someone who's a functional alcoholic that can still go to work, still function, still get their tasks done. And when someone says you may be dependent on alcohol, no, that's that drunk on the side of the road who doesn't have a job and he or she is homeless and they're doing that and the other. And it's like, no, understand that we can have compulsive disorders. And it's not to say that sex is bad, and we can say men being men, we're going to have high sex drive. Boys will be boys, and we'll all do that. And there's nothing wrong with having our sex drive. I think where it kind of like crosses the line is where you do it, and it can have a potentially negative impact on your health, on your job, on your relationships, on something else. And so I think that's the determining factor. There's nothing wrong with enjoying sex, with having pleasure, with doing all the freaky shit you want to do. But when it has something where it impacts on you negatively, or your person, or the people around you, or your job, or whatever you're doing, that's when it becomes a problem. And he referred me to a book called Cruise Control.
I remember this.
That was written by a PhD, and I forgot the guy's name. But if you go on Amazon, just type in Cruise Control under books. It was about gay men and sexual compulsive behavior and addiction. And I remember I read the book afterwards, and there were parts of it where I was like, oh shit, like that's me. There were other parts that I was like, okay, I haven't gotten that bad. But the principle of the matter was around high functioning people who were stressed, and with guys especially, we tend to push shit in, and so it manifests in one behavior we can control, which is our sex.
So I think where the barrier becomes is where people say, oh, well, what about you're not being sexually positive, you know, if you start to judge people's behaviors. It's not judging the behaviors. It's taking an inventory. Okay, how many times did you miss out of work? How many times did you lie to your partner? How many times did you get an STI, or you know, miss dinner, you know, your parents' 50th anniversary. So those kinds of things, those things that you normally would enjoy, you're putting down the back burner so that you can do this. Or, you know, jacking off in at work when you have a 10-minute break and you're taking an hour, you know, because you're on the phone and porn, you know.
And you have a presentation done, or you're supposed to be on a conference call. Instead, you're in the bathroom masturbating. We've got some questions.
Yeah, we got some comments that are coming in. And as we go through the comments, I want to also note that, you know, this is a discussion. So we're learning from you as much as you are learning from us.
Absolutely.
This is really opening the door. So there are some comments that I know that are going to come in that we won't have answers for. But this is where I invite folks, if there is information that you have, please definitely share it. I want to go to Caleb first. And Caleb said, how do you suggest folks go about learning more about the research that is being conducted? It's not always thank you for this. It's
Yeah.
not always accessible to folks and typically only shared in academia or public health spaces.
Amen to that. It's
So
challenging.
Google Scholarly.
Oh, that's right.
articles,
Google Scholar. Yeah.
Google Scholar is
Yeah.
one place to look at
Yeah.
where you can search for these things.
And look for. But I'm telling you right now, I just looked today, and there's some, but there's not a lot.
Yeah. I mean, it is hard, and that's one of the problems. So, Caleb, you're absolutely right, is that there's not enough access to this stuff. And then this is when it comes to us, right? So if someone says to me, we don't have it, but in medical spaces and public health spaces, that's when we have to create it for ourselves. And so this is where, we have someone on like Jon who's been working in this field and been screaming at the top of his lungs that people pay attention to this since, the mid 2000s. And so you have his handle on Twitter. Reach out to him so you can do that. So if you want to bring this to another level, it's not throwing it back at us. But again, it's kind of that adage, we are the answers we've been looking for.
Yes.
If you're looking for it in academia or in the medical professions, you may not always find it. So if you notice a deficit somewhere, Toni Morrison said this too. If there's a book, if you don't resonate with the book, if you find a topic, write that novel, write that book. If you find something that doesn't resonate, write the book that you would want to read. So just do it that way. And hopefully we can find something. And hopefully Jon can help you or one of us can help you kind of track down some of those things to bring it outside of the academia into the public setting.
And calling our organizations, we have a lot of discussion groups, we have a lot of support groups, asking that they cover this topic, asking that this comes up.
Right.
Yeah, because
it's not going away.
It's not going away, and that's why I'm glad that we're having this conversation tonight, because it's like, okay, yes, we need to talk about this.
Right.
So Morgan has Morgan ML3. Hey, Morgan.
Hey, Morgan.
He was like, he has a two-parter. He's like, actually, it's a three-parter, so I'll do all three. For number one was, hey, folks, I know this doesn't apply to everyone dealing with sexual addiction, but I have noticed that the use of drugs like meth and ecstasy and Molly have become more common among SGL men of color. We actually have talked about that. Particularly around meth, we actually had a conversation guide that the Counter Narrative Project just released called Can We Talk? You can get that from our website at thecounternarrative.org. Mm-hmm. So absolutely, we are beginning to have these conversations and also need more studies in this area too.
Yeah, be clear, that's a symptom, that's not the problem. Right. Yeah. So sexual compulsivity kind of that's the base of everything, although you kind of look at the psychology behind it, like the stress, the other shit that we're dealing with, the microaggressions, and then the sprinkling on top is the drugs. And so we go to drugs to kind of deaden our senses, and so we can engage in these behaviors without any guilt, without any stuff like that. So they all kind of intersect, so it's a great point.
Yeah, I want to bring in, so there's a question that came in. I want to go right to Morgan's next question because, and we're in right into this. Does the drug use influence the sexual addiction? You just answered that question. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it also presents a barrier when we're talking about studies, right? Mm-hmm. So automatically when chemsex is introduced into it, then it becomes something different. Right? And so now we're studying the chemsex with rather than the actual compulsivity of it.
Yes.
So now
it's
because of the chemsex, and not necessarily, like you said, that's a symptom. It's not what it actually is.
It's not the root of the problem. And I think we should go over today. I think today's one of those nights where we should go over.
I think
we have some extra questions.
Right.
Because Alvin's going to be going like this. We need to let Alvin know, don't be doing that to us that much, because we need to go over. This is an important topic, y'all. Tell Alvin, put in the comment. Tell Alvin to free us and let us talk for some more.
So, Alex, you actually asked the question, and we did talk about that. Is cybersex sexting? Is cybersex sexting? I think cybersex is I don't know the specific definition of cybersex. I think it's a version of it.
Yeah, I mean, but cybersex is the same thing. It's like you're having sex, you're getting a pleasure out of it.
Right. But it's
so it's that now. Are you cybersexting while you're at work and you're supposed to go on a meeting?
Right.
That's what we're trying. We have to get it back.
Yeah.
Because you can enjoy cybersex.
Absolutely.
With no problem.
Right.
But when it starts to cause a problem, that's when we're saying we have to look at the compulsive.
Yeah, and again, like to Jon's point, like the technology will advance with it. Yeah. So again, it doesn't speak to what the behavior is or why we engage in a behavior that could be potentially self-destructive. Not to say that having multiple partners or having a lot of sex or enjoying your sex or masturbating. None of that is pathological. But if it starts to harm you, your job, your health, people around you, relationships, that's when it becomes problematic. And so sexting, cyber sex, is just when the technology catches up.
Right.
We'll just put those behaviors into a new technology. That's
Right.
all.
Yep. I'm going to. So there was a Butch asked a question, and
Hey, Butch.
hey Butch, how are you?
Butch is in Seattle.
Hey, Seattle, and actually, there's a comment too. So the Butch was going back to when you were talking about the he's got to have it studied. Does age factor into the study? How many older SGL men of color talk about or admit to their behaviors? I'm not.
We did it from like 16. The youngest was 16. I think the oldest was like 60 something, 62, 63 something.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
So
so it was just blind and people were just answering it. And it's, I mean, if you're having sex, I'll give you a good example of what it was. All right. Somebody came and said, "Oh, my boyfriend doesn't get hard when he's having sex with me unless I put on a porn, and that's the only way he'll function." And he's never looking at me; he's looking at the porn, and
right.
And so, that can present a problem because that's affecting your relationship. If your partner's not turning you on, unless you have porn, then that's something to look into.
Right.
We're not diagnosing anybody. We're just saying look into it.
These are the different things that were coming up.
Yeah, and that's a natural thing that happens a lot, that people get so enamored because, as you were saying earlier, that porn's so available, that our erections, us getting hard, me busting a nut, is going to be centered around the images and the behaviors and the scenes that we see play out in porns. And then when we go to our real life situations with either our partners or random hookups or whoever we're having sex with, and it doesn't match what we see in the porn, you'll either lose your erection or it takes it a lot longer to nut. And that can be problematic, and that can affect your interpersonal life and all these other things. So that's kind of some of the things we're talking about with this, and then it impacts like how you're interacting with other people, because then you just become someone who has to watch porn with everything, and then when you're actually trying to connect with someone, you can't do it.
Right.
So it may be hard.
This is heavy, and all of these things, and I think so often, like, these things, they connect in our lives. Like, life is complex, and our experiences and the things, and I think this just speaks to all of that. So first of all, Trey Sam. Hey, Trey Sam. Trey Sam said, "Hey, Kings.
Hey,
good to see you." Adam Jackson mentioned, so for cruise control, Robert Weiss.
Robert Weiss, yes. Thank you, Adam.
Thank
That's
you.
the guy. I completely forgot. It was on the tip of my tongue. Thank you, Adam. Because, Robert Weiss, it's on Amazon. So if you go, I don't know whether he's revised it or not, because it's a fairly old book. But I think he may have gone in and revised it. But it's called Cruise Control. And it's really a great book if you read it. I actually recommended it to someone who I thought had some issues with sexual compulsion. And it took him months to read it. But when he was reading it, he texted me and he was like, "Doc, oh my God, this is like my life."
Wow.
And so there are things you can see in that. And again, it's not to say that you're pathological or you're wrong, but it's just to kind of get you in the mindset of saying, like, okay, are there some of these scenarios where, my sexual behavior or my desire to have sex is actually negatively impacting me? Because there's no norm to how much one should masturbate, how much one should have sex. I have problems with like calling somebody normal or hyper or hypo or whatever terms we want to use, but it's got to be what's right for you, and only you can decide when something is actually bad for you or becoming detrimental, or whether it's healthy. And only you, when you look yourself in the mirror, can actually answer that question.
Absolutely. And our final comment, Bruce says, "Thanks for reminding me of the stress component related to sexual compulsion. My behaviors around sexual compulsion abated stress and gave me a rush."
Yeah. So why do people drink alcohol? Like, what do you say after you've had a long day at work?
Let me grab. I gotta grab.
I need a drink. What do people do when they smoke weed? I need to smoke a blunt because it takes the edge off. So you can insert sex in that equation too. You're messed up at work. You're doing this and the other. Why you all of a sudden are on Grindr looking around? You're all of a sudden on Jack'd or Scruff, or you go home and you masturbate, and then once you nut, you're like, I feel better again. So I think that relationship to like how our lives and our stress, and I think particularly for Black or brown people, why it's so crazy that we're not in a lot of these studies, because all the microaggressions, the racism, the sexual prejudice against same gender loving folks, all that shit is there, and yet we're the least studied, but we're dealing with all this stuff that would lead us.
And because we don't want to give up what we like.
Right.
That's
I think
so
part of
real.
it too. I think that's part of it too.
So that idea of not wanting to give up, I want to explore that for a second. That idea, because I do think, so the thing that we mentioned, and I'm glad the Mayo Clinic definition covered this, is because sex feels good.
It feels good.
Sex feels good.
And you should have it because it feels good.
Exactly. And
right. It feels good.
Yeah. Shout out to Tony.
They knew what was up back then.
Right.
Yeah, so it's this idea of that automatically we think that you're trying to take our guns away from us, right? That kind of comparison. It's that kind of comparison.
That's what we could do with the Republicans. We can say, like, look, like you're trying to regulate our sex. How you like us regulating your guns, right?
So it's not that we want to take away the kind of porn you like to watch or you jacking on. That's not what it is, and I think that's what's stuck in people's minds is that if I start to do this, this introspection, I might have to give up jacking off. No, we're not saying that at all.
No, you don't.
What we're saying is that you might have to give up jacking off while you were due to a meeting 3 hours ago.
Right.
Or choosing to do that over your sister's or brother's wedding.
Right.
You're going to go jack off or hook up with somebody and you're supposed to be the best man.
Yeah.
Or you're supposed to walk somebody down the aisle and you just decide to fuck somebody in the bathroom.
Yeah.
That's when you may have to question.
Or you're at church and, you go to the bathroom to have sex at church. Well, yeah.
So I think, and that's the thing is, and Caleb says this, yes, it's all within context, right?
Yeah.
And this is all so personal for folks. And I think the important part about us having this conversation is just opening up the conversation about being able to, one, do the self-introspection, and two, be able to have this within our friend circles.
Right.
And how easy is it for us to be honest?
Right.
That's one of the major hurdles that we have when we have to be honest with ourselves and say, hey, this is happening and I don't like it.
Or is it a problem? Is it hurting me? Yeah. That's tough.
And I'm
Alvin's
gonna wrap. Trey Sam, thank you so much. We put so much into our orgasms. Ooh, that's just a word.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
I want to thank
some more than others.
Right, John. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for really starting down this path at a time when people weren't having this conversation. And I thank you for continuing to do this work and continuing to have this conversation. So for y'all, thank you so much for joining us. Take this conversation back to your friend circles. Talk about it. Pick up cruise control. Just whatever the conversations become, we just need to make sure that we have them. So you can find us online on Instagram. We're at The Counter Narrative. Facebook, Counter Narrative Project, and on Twitter at Building Desire. Make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the thumbs up button. So we will be back here for Revolutionary Health. We'll be back for Revolutionary Health in September, but we will have some stuff in between. So that's not Revolutionary Health. So please subscribe so you can see what Counter Narrative Project videos are coming up. So grateful for all of y'all. Thank you for joining us and have a great evening. We'll see you for Revolutionary Health in September.
Bye, y'all.